Hello everyone, Dr. Jazzyfresh is back. You have clicked on part 2 of my overall Final Fantasy theory series. In part 1, I introduced my Final Fantasy timeline theory, in which I began to organize the chronological order of the Final Fantasy games. If you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend you do, as I will expand on ideas introduced in part 1. In summary, the main ideas from part 1 is that each Final Fantasy game's main events can be put into a timeline in relation to each other, and the actions of certain characters are pivotal to the creation story of another world or the continuation of their world in a different game. In this video, I am proposing another theory, the actual structure of the Final Fantasy universe, a solar system that reflects our own. There have been many images from space in cutscenes from Final Fantasy games. In Final Fantasy IV, characters travel to 2 different moons. In Final Fantasy VII, a projection of outer space is shown by Bugenhagen. In Final Fantasy VIII, we travel to a space station. In Final Fantasy IX, we are shown the world with a blue moon and a red moon. In Final Fantasy XIII, we see the souls of the people travel to our planet of Earth. With that said, it was easy to play some of the games based on in-game content, while for others I had to be a little bit more creative. As a recap from part 1, Final Fantasy XIV introduced the Sea of Stars, which were planets created pre-Sundering. This included the worlds of Final Fantasy XI's Vanadil, Final Fantasy Type O's Orients, Final Fantasy V's Planet R, Final Fantasy XIII's Nova Crystalia, Final Fantasy XII's Ivalice, Final Fantasy XIV's Aetheres, Final Fantasy X's Spira, Final Fantasy XV's Eos, and Final Fantasy XVI's homeworld of Ultima. When Final Fantasy XIV's planet was sundered into 13 reflections, only 5 remained independent, while 1 was lost to the void, and the other 7 were rejoined to the source world. The 5 that remained very well could have given way to other planets that will arise post-sundering. I propose the idea that the first reflection became the planet in which Final Fantasy III, 1, and 6 will occur. This leaves 4 other reflections. In my timeline theory, there are 12 games whose main events happen post-sundering. However, the worlds of Final Fantasy X and 15 were already around. Removing them in Final Fantasy III, 1, and 6 from the equation, we are left with 7 games. Of the 7 left, I believe some games share the same planet, and by the time I finish this theory, one could speculate that the 4 remaining planets or reflections provided worlds for Final Fantasy II, 4, 7, 8, 9, 16, and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. As a summary for theories to come, based on our solar system, pre-sundering planets include Venus, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, along with dwarf planets Pluto, Makemake, Haumea, Eris, and Sedna. Post-sundering planets include Mercury, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and the dwarf planet Eris. It is said that Final Fantasy IV takes place on the blue planet, and that the Lunarians originally lived on the planet between the red planet and the big behemoth. The blue planet could be a reference to Earth, and the Lunarians' destroyed planet could be a reference to the dwarf planet of Eris, which is between Mars and Jupiter. Final Fantasy VII also seems to occur on Earth based on Bugenhagen's display of the solar system from the original Final Fantasy game. So Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VII share the same planet. I am aware that in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the planet is shown actually on the 7th planet from the sun, and the other planets shown look unique and almost as if they were in reverse order. The planet closest to the sun being Neptune, the third one with the rings around it being Saturn, and Final Fantasy VII technically taking place on Venus. However, if the dwarf planet of Eris is included, then Final Fantasy would be on Earth again, and the fiery 6th planet would be Mars. But for all intents and purposes of this video, I will stick with the original arrangement as Final Fantasy VII taking place on the 3rd planet from the sun, aka Earth. Furthermore, both Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VII share themes of finding one's identity and purpose, as seen with Cecile and Cloud struggling with their own realities while dealing with foreign threats to their planet in the form of the Creator, of the True Moon, or Genova. Final Fantasy XIII seems to be on Uranus, as the souls of the people were carried to Earth, past the planet with rings, which would be Saturn, a red planet, which would be Mars, and Earth's moon, as shown in the final cutscene of Final Fantasy XIII Lightning Returns. Not destroyed, the planet was left an empty husk that is now Uranus. In mythology, Uranus is a primordial god of the heavens, and his union with Gaia produced the first life on Earth. If Final Fantasy XIII is on Uranus, and the people were united with Earth, aka Gaia, then this would fit perfectly. Final Fantasy V introduced their planet as having a black moon, and the dwarf planet of Makemake is also said to have a dark moon. Since Final Fantasy V's planet R probably became Alphatron, Medion's destruction of this planet turned it into the dwarf planet of Makemake. Dwarf planet Eris also has a dark moon. According to mythology, Eris is the goddess of discord. This would fit with the 13th reflection of Final Fantasy XIV, being the land of the Void Sent with their unique red moon. Final Fantasy XIV's source planet, Earth-Ceres, has 2 moons, one large white one and Moon, a small red one. Since the planet was sundered into 13 reflections, it could be the dwarf planet of Haumea, which also has 2 moons. The rest of the games were a bit harder to place, but here are my thoughts for the most distant planets and the dwarf planets. Final Fantasy X's planet of Spirit I placed on Pluto. Pluto was once considered a planet until it was reclassified as a dwarf planet. The world map of Spirit is smaller than most other Final Fantasy games, if not all of them honestly, so I saw that fitting. In mythology, Pluto is also known as Hades, rules the afterlife. If you know Final Fantasy X story very well, people of the afterlife exude a strong will on living in this world, as shown through the unsent, which are lingering wills of the dead. Presumably not destroyed, but the planet of Spirit would die out, so more drained of life, leaving it the empty husk that is Pluto. Final Fantasy Type 0 I placed on the dwarf planet of Sedna. The world of Uranus and Pandemonium were created by gods from Final Fantasy XIII to open the gate to the afterlife, the gate to the goddess Etro of the unseen realm. In mythology, Sedna is the Inuit goddess of the underworld, much like Etro. Interestingly, the destruction of their bodies give rise to species, Etros to human and Sedna to the sea animals. I would love to believe that Uranus and its cycles were stopped and the simulation destroyed, which is why I placed it on the dwarf planet of Sedna. Final Fantasy XII I placed on Neptune just due to the fact that Final Fantasy XII has strong ties to Final Fantasy XIV and should be close by. In mythology, Neptune symbolizes the ocean, creativity, and dreams. Not specific themes per se to Final Fantasy XII, but it did have a creative fighting system and weather effects to the gameplay. Neptune is known to have the most extreme weather of the planets of the solar system. This could relate to Final Fantasy XII as weather affects character stats, behavior of equipment, magic effectiveness, and what enemies you encounter. The fate of Eris is unknown, but it would probably cease to support life and become Neptune. Speaking of weather, the planet with the second most extreme weather is Saturn. I placed Final Fantasy XI's Vana'diel on this planet because this game introduced weather as a gameplay mechanic that affects combat. In mythology, Saturn is the god of time and ruled during a golden age. He is a god who fathered many, including Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, and Eris. Remember, I placed Final Fantasy VII as the first game to occur in my timeline theory, which will be the dawn of the Final Fantasy universe and recurring characters therein. Furthermore, after much turmoil, the world would reach a sort of golden age, the age of adventure, where 5 races and beastmen lived peacefully. Like other major planets, it would cease to support life and become an empty husk that is Saturn. Moving along, many planets in our solar system formed around the same time. Jupiter is thought to have been the oldest and Saturn next. I initially placed Final Fantasy XI on Jupiter since I believed it to be the oldest world and was leaning towards placing Final Fantasy XVI on Saturn. However, in Final Fantasy XVI, Clive can participate in trials using powers of one icon through Chronolis. Each icon trial is named after a moon of Saturn: Hyperion, Dione, Hephaestus, Titan, Mimas, Rhea, Enceladus, and the missing Tethys, which would probably be for Leviathan's trial if he were not lost. However, most of the same icons in Final Fantasy XVI are also the celestial avatars of Final Fantasy XI. The exception being that Final Fantasy XVI's Phoenix replaces Final Fantasy XI's Ifrit, and Final Fantasy XVI's Bahamut replaces Final Fantasy XI's Alexander. In Final Fantasy XI, Phoenix and Bahamut were delegated to terrestrial avatars and not celestial ones. But based on my timeline theory, if Final Fantasy XI occurred before Final Fantasy XVI, I believe Final Fantasy XVI's icons were paying homage to Final Fantasy XI's avatars, and quite possibly Final Fantasy XVI's Ultima created them in the image set forth by Final Fantasy XI's world. In other words, Final Fantasy XI occurred on Saturn, and I believe Final Fantasy XVI and another game will share Jupiter instead. I believe Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy II will occur on Jupiter. Both games share themes of rebellion against a self-appointed supreme ruler, which in my theory is essentially the same person, Ultima. Here I will introduce the idea of Ultima of Final Fantasy XVI becoming Satan of Final Fantasy II, who possesses the Emperor Matthias to pursue conquest of all worlds. Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system, which could be a testament to the Emperor's ambition, his absorption of other worlds. He can control demon armies and has a signature move called Starfall, which is a form of the spell Meteor. Also, the star and the planet are interchangeable in the Final Fantasy universe. Notably, Starfall 16 is used by the final boss of Souls of Rebirth from Final Fantasy II by the light form of the Emperor, which could be a nod to Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy II's connection. Also could connect to Ultima's feelings of himself as a supreme god. On the flip side, Starfall 10, used by the Emperor's hellish counterpart in Pandemonium, could reflect his associations with demons and most notably parasites that can turn people and animals into demons. There are 4 games that are associated with demons, parasites, and meteors as major plot elements. These games being Final Fantasy XV, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. We already know Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy VII are connected, but what if their connection was more than just through Shinra, but other characters as well? I and many others have proposed the Unalesca is Genova theory, and I really can see it. Honestly, Unalesca was an unsent with a strong will, and her father Yevon became a parasite-like organism. Together, they could become Genova, who traveled the universe using a meteor or an empty planet of Spear as its vessel. This may or may not be influenced by the Emperor, but this may be an attractive connection between the two if he interacted with Unalesca or turned Yevon into a parasite. The Emperor's signature move, Starfall 10, could represent the meteor that originated in Final Fantasy X with Unalesca and Yevon becoming Genova and ended up damaging the planet of Final Fantasy VII. Furthermore, in mythology, Jupiter is the king of many deities, 2 being Mars and Venus. If the Emperor truly is responsible for sending meteors carrying parasites to Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles and Final Fantasy XV, and also just destroyed other planets in the process, it is only fitting that he would rule from Jupiter on the other side of the asteroid belt. With this said, this will lead me to my next planets, Mars and Venus. I placed Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles and Final Fantasy IX on Mars. In both games, the people have a smaller cartoon-like stature compared to other Final Fantasy games. Both games share themes of fighting for one's existence and longevity. Both the Terrans and the people of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles wanted immortality and sought that through taking over or merging with other planets, which is why I believe they are the same people. I believe Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles' world will become Terra and Final Fantasy IX's world will become Gaia. As we know, Mars has 2 moons. In Final Fantasy IX, we learned that the planet of Terra, which has a red crystal and red moon, tried to merge with the younger planet of Gaia, which has a blue crystal and blue moon. But this merger failed, leaving the planet with 2 moons. Of course, it is known that Mars has 2 moons in its orbit, Moving back to the Final Fantasy universe, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles planet was hit with a meteor carrying a parasite that gave rise to miasma, or a deadly poison. This allowed despair to spread and other forces to feed off of it, increasing the presence of monsters and fiends, making a strong connection between Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy XV, as Final Fantasy XV also dealt with toxic mists, or it can also be called miasma, that also bred fiends and monsters in the form of these demons. But I did place Eos of Final Fantasy XV on a different planet. The world of Eos in Final Fantasy XV occurs on our planet of Venus. I also placed Final Fantasy VIII on this planet. In mythology, Venus is a goddess of love, beauty, and battle. Both games highlight powerful mystical women, be it the Oracle Lunafreya of Final Fantasy XV, the Astro Shiva of Final Fantasy XV, or the sorceresses from Final Fantasy VIII. The themes of love and generational fate are also strong plot elements in both of these games. Final Fantasy XV's planet is named Eos, which is the dawn goddess, sister of the sun and moon. We know in both games the moon is a symbol of dark times and connected to demons. In Final Fantasy XV, a parasite that thrives in the dark will infect its host, causing them to turn into a demon. In Final Fantasy VIII, demons attack the planet through a concentrated strike from the moon known as the Lunar Cry. Venus is also called Earth's twins, and this could be reflected in how both Final Fantasy XV and Final Fantasy VII dealt with parasitic meteors, and Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VIII dealt with threats from the moon using very different strategies. Furthermore, Final Fantasy XV's world heavily mirrors our Earth in a Final Fantasy style way, of course, while Final Fantasy VII is a direct reflection of our dying Earth due to human-derived environmental decay. Lastly, Venus is the second planet from the Sun, and it is worth noting that Venus doesn't have any moons. I believe that due to the moon being infected with these demons, these fiends, these monsters, that people would have gotten rid of it, leaving the planet unable to support life to become an empty husk that is Venus. There are theories on how Venus lost its moon. One states a celestial body collided, creating a moon that eventually drifted out of Venus's orbit, while another suggests that Venus was hit twice, resulting in the formation of a moon and its subsequent merging into the planet of Venus. I like to believe it drifted away into Earth's orbit to become this ancient planet called Theia. In other words, Venus provided a celestial body that would become Earth's moon. Keep this thought in mind as I will expand on this more in part 3. Lastly, Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy I, and Final Fantasy VI occur on Mercury. Mercury is the first planet in the solar system. Naturally, the world I believe would become the first after the sundering of Earth-Ceres from Final Fantasy XIV is where Final Fantasy III, 1, and 6 will take place. While the 13th is in the darkest abyss of space, the first is in the lightest. The world was formed from a flood of light, and what light is brighter than the sun? These 3 games share themes of balancing light and dark. The dark will attract the light, and the light will attract the dark. In mythology, Mercury is a messenger god. Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy III stories are introduced through prophecy specifically related to warriors of light, saving the world from impeding darkness. These are also themes in Final Fantasy XV and Final Fantasy IV, which is why I placed them on subsequent planets. As for Final Fantasy VI, the characters face the world of ruin, much like the people of Eos of Final Fantasy XV and the people of Gaia from Final Fantasy VII. Lastly, the world map of Final Fantasy I is like a mirror-like image of Final Fantasy VI world, so I placed them on the same planet while adding Final Fantasy III's main events as a distant past or ancient times before Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy VI. In conclusion, this is my theory of how the universe or the physical solar system of the Final Fantasy universe is structured. In part 1, I discussed the timeline of events, particularly for the games I placed in the pre-sundering era, such as Final Fantasy XI, Type 0, 5, 13, and 12. In part 2, I introduced how the universe was reconstructed post-sundering of Final Fantasy XIV's world. In part 3, I will put everything together and dive into the games I delegated to the post-Sundering era, such as Final Fantasy 3, 16, 2, Crystal Chronicles 15, 1, 6, 4, 9, 8, 10, and 7. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification button so you know when the next part will drop. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Catch you in the next video. Take care.